I'm Nick Hernandez, and you're listening to the Positivity Matters podcast. On this show, we talk about well being, the theory, research, and practice thereof. Today, my guest is David Berez. He is a graduate with a master's degree in positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania. He works in the realm of resilience, and I will let him tell you more about who he is. David, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. Grateful to be part of your program and to share my thoughts and experiences with your audience. And grateful for the work you do as well. Uh, so I do positive psychology for law enforcement. That's kind of the space I'm in now. The space that I come from is I had a career in emergency services with the first 10 years of my life from ages 14 to 24 in the EMS space as a volunteer. And then from the age of 24 to 44, 20 plus years, with the East Windsor Police Department as a police officer. And then I rounded out my career with about 2.5 years in the Office of Emergency Management in Hopewell Township, New Jersey. For those that are not familiar with the East Coast in New Jersey, Hopewell is where George Washington crossed the Delaware before the Battle of Trenton 250 years ago this past Christmas. So it's been an exciting space to be here. But yes, I work in the area of positive psychology, try to bring the concepts of evidence based tools to the law enforcement community, where we have, unfortunately, a bit of a mental health crisis and a suicide crisis within our community, and hoping to mitigate some of that through the lens of positive interventions that are evidence based tools in the space of positive psychology.
Beautiful. So, with this positive psychology, a part of one of the interesting threads of that world is what I would describe as strength psychology. And in that area, thank you for sharing your top psychological strengths with me. I see honesty, kindness, curiosity, perspective, and social intelligence. I was wondering if you might share a bit about um, one or more of those that really resonates with you and how that plays out through the work that you do.
For sure. I think one of the things that's important for the audience to consider is that there are no weaknesses in the 24 strengths. The top five certainly are signature strengths where we lean on the heaviest. And I was initially surprised at some of the order of where my strengths fell in, but honesty truly is my top strength. I would have to say I am about as vulnerable and candid as they come. What you see is what you get with me. But I'll also say that sometimes our greatest strengths can be our greatest weaknesses. I uh, don't necessarily have a filter related to my honesty, and it can often get me into trouble by being too candid with people and too authentic. But honesty is certainly a place that I have found a career in, both in law enforcement and in the positive psychology space. And when we start moving down the list towards kindness, it goes back to some of my core values. I feel that I was put on this earth to serve others, and I found that in both EMS and law enforcement, but I find it now when I give back to the community and once where I served. Police officers are very selfless people to begin with, and I found myself with some emptiness when I retired, and going back to serve those that are still serving was where I found that was the most important space for me. So that's kind of where my kindness comes in. And then curiosity would certainly fall into my investigatory interests on the job. And now I think is really associated with my love of learning, which is a little bit lower on the list, but I think those two kind of go together. I'm definitely curious about people, curious about human behavior and how we can do better for ourselves. So those are my top three. And um, I think once we go beyond that, things kind of intermix a little bit. Um, but those are what drive me in the work that I do.
Beautiful. I was hearing some glimpses of purpose there as well.
For sure.
And I don't know if that, how how honed that part is. I know sometimes there's things like best possible self exercises, coming up with one's own values, vision, mission, uh, serving those who serve. I could see that being like a mantra or like a mission or, um, but
Well, I think all of
any,
it's mission driven,
yeah,
right? Like,
yeah.
and that's where purpose definitely comes in. We all have things that we're passionate about, and then we all have things. We all have ways that we enact on those passions. And for me, giving back to the people that are serving our communities, a place, an environment that I have come from myself, I think is really important because I get it. Like, there's a cultural competency there that I think is really important when serving or when considering the challenges that people are going through and helping them through those challenges. I think it's important to have come from the shoes that they currently walk in.
How were EMS and law enforcement similar? How are they different?
Wow, that's a great question. I don't know if anybody's ever asked me that. So I think the way you help people is different, and not the purpose or the cause, but the product itself. So, on the EMS side, it's true compassion, trying to serve the injured, the disabled, the victim. Where on the law enforcement side, you're serving a greater good, which is the community. And sometimes that means helping an individual through a crisis or a problem. And sometimes that means helping the community by removing that person who is the problem. And I think that is probably the biggest difference is in EMS, you're never going to kill somebody because they were the problem and let them die. Um, on the EMS side, if a drunk driver is the most injured party in a crash, you're not going to say, screw it, they were the ones that caused the problem, we're going to let them rot. That's not going to happen. You're going to treat them as any other patient. On the police side, there is the responsibility, the legal responsibility to remove the bad actor from the general uh, pace of society if they're the one causing the problem. And again, that doesn't mean you're going to intentionally hurt somebody, but those removal actions um, do come with a responsibility where if you have to inflict harm on that person, you have a level of authority to do that for the greater good of the community. That doesn't mean that you let them stay harmed, but you may need to use force to be able to enact that greater good. So I think that's one of the biggest differences. And there's a lot of legal responsibilities on the law enforcement side that dictate your job, where on the EMS side, you can be a little bit more creative on how you save people.
I'm guessing that there's quite a few times when both entities are involved
Yeah,
in a call, and there's a variety of
there can be
means.
conflicting perspectives too when you
Yeah.
have police, fire, and EMS all working together. At a fire scene, police are trying to preserve the scene for an investigation, and fire is hacking away with axes, hoses, and water and drowning the place to death, and destroying every fringe of evidence that you might be going to look to find. Um, yeah, Fires really loves chopping up roofs and kicking in doors. And for us, sometimes we need that preservation of evidence to look for a crime or prosecute one. So yeah, so there's conflicting interests sometimes, but it's all good. It's positive relationships, and in the end, we're as a community trying to serve the community in the best capacity. So it can help heal the damage that was done.
And what was it like considering getting a graduate degree? What was it like pursuing the degree? And what is it like to have the degree?
All great. On the upfront, the short answer is yes. It was awesome to all of it. I will say that I'm not a good student. As much as I love to learn and I have this intense curiosity about things, I'm not a good academic student. I graduated high school with a 1.8 GPA, and I did do much better in college with a 2.8 GPA, so almost double. And I was really concerned about 30 years later what it would look like to then go back to an Ivy League graduate program, a topic I was so interested in. And had really come to love prior to applying. And you don't get what you don't ask for, what you don't try for. And I think it was Michael Jordan said that you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And so I put it out there, and I was able to get in, which was absolutely amazing. Um, there was a lot of imposter syndrome sitting in that classroom the first day. Uh, in an Ivy League institution with a lot of people who were there for their second or third graduate degree. There were, some people that had terminal degrees in that class that were adding a master's to their doctorates, and uh, it was intimidating for sure. Uh, Age-wise, I was probably a median age for the class at the age of 48, I guess it was when I went in, and so there was a little less intimidation there, thinking that, oh, everybody's younger, everybody's older. It was a pretty good mix of people. But the coursework was challenging. It was very rigorous. It was a lot of reading and a lot of dissecting and understanding and putting concepts together that I thought I knew about, but dang, I didn't know anything. And having it broken down by some of the greatest thinkers in the space of psychology and positive psychology was really a special experience for me. Some of the greatest minds across the planet in this field, and that's what you get from an Ivy League institution is you have people that culminate onto that space, because they're the best of the best. So it was a great learning experience, and the format for which that course takes creates community. And for me, that was really special. I grew up in a locker room my entire life, whether it was high school sports, EMS, police department. And when I retired, I no longer had that locker room community. And I know I don't mean that in a creepy way. I mean that as in a communal way where you're really sharing your heart and soul with a small group of people that know you best. It's very different than your family at home. And I didn't think that I would ever find that space again. And when I got to my graduate program, it's a cohort of 50 that all travel together. And I felt connected in a way that I hadn't felt since I retired. And these people are going to be some of my closest companions going forward for the rest of my life. And when you graduate and then you expand into the greater MAP community, which has a little over 850 graduates now, you feel just as close or almost as close to the entire MAP community or positive psychology community as you did to your own cohort. So I think uh, that is one of the greatest pieces for me post graduation that I feel is that sense of connection and community, those relationships. But I also really appreciate the opportunity to understand the science behind stuff that I was already looking at and teaching. And prior to the MAP program, I felt like I was just reading off slides and talking to a classroom based on somebody else's work and slides. But now, having had the education, I feel like I can speak to it at a much deeper level, and it's more authentic in the way that I can teach it to others rather than death by PowerPoint. So I think
Mhm.
hopefully that answers your question, long format. Um, but yeah, MAP has been a true turning point in my life and has set me on a track that I never expected in a really great way.
Yeah. What was the earliest memory you have of even hearing that positive
Ah,
psychology exists?
So when I retired from law enforcement, January 1st of 2020, I did so without purpose. I did so without a plan, and I stepped into this abyss of the unknown. And in that same period of time, I also recognized that my mental health was challenged over the course of my career, both from the time I was 14 as a volunteer up through the 20 years in police work. I didn't really have language to put to the feelings that I had. And I think that's a problem we have in our business in general. That was the same time here in New Jersey that we lost so many police officers to suicide in a very short period of time. And then, so if you look at the calendar upon my retirement, I'm stepping into COVID, and then I'm stepping into the civil unrest that occurred in June following the Minneapolis incident. And it was very challenging for us for law enforcement to manage through that time period for all of those reasons. And on July 29th, a very close friend of mine had taken his own life, and I was very integral in his waning days and days and months of his life and career, because I was recognizing that he was being challenged by the time and the moment, and I was trying to find ways to support him, but I didn't have the language, didn't have the words, didn't have the skill sets. And when Danny died on July 29th, I recognized that I was just as vulnerable to suicide as he was. And I needed to find ways to make him the last one in my life to go through that. So I had written an article because I had been writing a lot at that last 6 months after I retired. I had written an article about Danny's suicide, and it really, I don't want to use the word viral because I don't even know how that's defined, but it hit a lot of people in a very short period of time, to the point where some people recognized, hey, Dave may have a problem here, and let's see if we can help him out. And that's when I learned that New Jersey was working on building what we called here Office of Resiliency for Law Enforcement. And it was internal as far as active duty officers. And my article that I wrote about Danny sparked a light bulb on some people that were intricately involved and said, hey, we're not touching the retirees with this program. We need to. They need to be brought into the inner circle. So I was fortunate to be able to be offered a spot and become a master resiliency trainer for the state of New Jersey under that program. And that's when I learned about the concepts of positive psychology. The words positive psychology were not used, by the way, in that training course. It was a resiliency class. And part of the course, we were introduced to Dr. Marty Seligman's book, Flourish. And in Flourish, I believe it's chapter 3 or 4, he talks about the Masters of Positive Psychology program at the University of Pennsylvania. And that's when the light bulb went off. I'm like, I love what we're learning here. I need to learn more. I don't like teaching without having a foundation. Let me see if I can get into this program. And that's where it all began.
And then in the program were probably different types of experiences, but I think you mentioned service learning, going to probably be guest speakers, certain classes. What were some of your favorites from experiences from sort of that, or maybe there's some other kind of thing that happened that's even cooler?
Yeah, favorites is hard to define, right? Because I think I enjoyed all of it, or I wouldn't have been
Mm.
there. I would say the one thing I did not enjoy was the statistics class. Numbers, me, stats, not a great fit, but they work with you in a way that you really do get through it. And I did learn a lot from that. I would just say that would probably be the lowest of my
Mm.
list of appreciated moments. But everything was awesome, from the connections to the coursework to the people that came in to speak to you. I mean, Dr. Sullivan, Marty, as he's affectionately known, is still there through the whole program. James Pawelski is the program director, also very influential in that space. He's a philosopher by trade, or by education, but he's also um, very integral in the positive psychology space, and writes a lot about positive psychology through the lens of a philosophical point of view. And he has also started the idea of the positive humanities, which is a passion for him, bringing the arts into the space of positive psychology, and how do we use the arts towards flourishing, towards human flourishing. And we can get back to that in a second. Um, that was bringing all these people in, from Barbara Fredrickson to Barry Schwartz to John Rady to all of these, um, uh, Roy Baumeister, Sonia Ubermersky, all of the big heavy hitters in the space of positive psychology came to us to be able to teach us. And I think that was really important to me to learn from the people that are actually doing the work, rather than professors who have read about the people doing the work. So that was a really cool experience. And I think rather than something that I enjoyed the most, I think that the way I would have phrase it as the parts that were most influential to me. And there were two things that stand out. And one is James's class in the positive humanities and arts and culture and how it influences human flourishing. And that's what I ended up doing my capstone or thesis about, was how can certain concepts within the humanities be used in the space of law enforcement to influence the well-being of police officers. And I chose literature, and I chose visual art, and I chose music, and I wrote about that. Then part of my project, my capstone project, was used to help influence the uh, the officers as artists exhibit in the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund and Museum down in Washington, D.C., an organization that I've been involved with for a very long time. But I was able to then connect passion with education and bring art to the concept of storytelling to law enforcement. And that's kind of what I teach now. That's probably my main or most popular course that I like to give. And how do we influence the positive well-being of law enforcement through the space of storytelling? And I use literature, visual art, and music to emphasize those. And I think the other most influential piece was actually not truly course related. And we were at lunch with Marty one day, and Marty asked me, he goes, "Man, I got a question for you. What allows police officers to run into gunfire when everybody else is running away?" And that was early January of 24, following a critical incident that was in the news that sparked that conversation. And I gave the typical answers. I don't know. We're trained to do it. We're, um, you know, want to serve. We want to make things right. Like whatever the general answers that you might give. And he's like, "Nah, but what's the academic theory?" I'm like, I don't know. Like that's your job, Marty. Like I'm not an academic. I'm here to learn from you." He's like, "No, I want you to come up with an academic theory." So it took me several months. But what I came back to was this idea of courageous optimism. And I broke that down into three separate parts, which is essentially self determination, self efficacy, and courage. And that has become a really strong foundation for the way, for the lens that at which I put everything through now, whether it be the writings that I do, the teachings that I do, the conversations I have. Courageous optimism, I think, is what makes police officers good cops, is that we have the will to do something, to do the good. We have the tools, the self-efficacy, which is the training, the physical tools on your belt, or the ability to make a difference. And then we have the courage. And I think what's important to talk about in that space of courage is its true definition. And courage is not the absence of fear, but acting in spite of it. And I've been very scared to go through doors. I've been very scared to walk into a house fire. I've been very scared to do things that were part of my job as a police officer. But I did them anyway because of the self efficacy and the self determination that's combined with that. So I had the will, I had the skill, and I had the courage. And I think when we look at law enforcement through that lens, we can look at recruitment, making sure those the people we're bringing in have that skill set. We can look at retention, where if someone's got that skill set, we don't want them to leave. So how do we keep them as part of our agency? And we look at that as also with promotion. You want your leaders to have that determination, to have that skill set, and to have that courage to make a difference. And I think the next step for me in that courageous optimism space is to find a way to test it and to build a scale on how to measure it. But as Marty told me, it takes about $250,000 to do, and I don't have those resources. So if anybody's listening wants to help support that, certainly would be interested in talking to you about it. But yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at now. That's how the program has influenced me.
Awesome. And what, yeah, so you kind of just answered the next question, which is what would you like to have happen in the future?
Yeah, I'd love to see if I could, advance the theory paper that I have on courageous optimism. I think that would be one of my number ones. The other things I want to look at and how we can support law enforcement to reduce the mental health crisis that we have, the self-destructive behaviors that lead to suicide. I want to understand how sabbaticals can be introduced into law enforcement in the same way they are introduced into academia. Maybe 90 days or 6 months every 5 years to do a reset or to get away from the job and learn something new, uh, to then bring back to the job after that point in time. I think one of the other things that we haven't looked at all is CTE in law enforcement. So CTE is a big problem in the military and the NFL. If you're a football fan, uh, CTE is damage to the brain from concussive injuries over time. So when you have a concussion and you don't let it heal, the compounding effect of multiple concussions on top of unhealed multiple concussions leads to a breakdown in the connective tissue in your brain, which then causes these irreversible damage to your brain. And the symptoms are violence, anger, self destructive behaviors. And I seeing those symptoms within a pretty high percentage of police officers, I'm wondering if CTE over the course of our careers is a factor. Really hard to learn about and find out about because you only can make that determination post death in an autopsy. And the brain needs to be studied to make that determination. So I want to make that a greater conversation in the space of law enforcement so we can study brains better and understand if this is a factor in our behaviors, um, because you can't control that. Now, what we can control is what tools are we giving officers to mitigate those behaviors and to extend their well-being, not just to themselves, but to their families. Similarly to the way we do it with football and with veterans. So it's understanding if that's a factor for us, I think is really important. So those are the things I would really like to advance in my career or in my research, and looking for a platform to be able to do that has been part of my initiatives.
Kind of sounds like you're out of retirement, or there wasn't really retirement intended even, but
Yeah, went from the what is it, the pot to the frying pan or whatever it's called. No, I definitely
uh,
retired from law enforcement. I didn't retire from work.
random question. Did you ever work with or know people in canine units?
Yeah, so we did not have a canine in our agency, but I definitely have a bunch of friends that were in that space and worked with them throughout the course of my career in different cases.
I was wondering from seeing various interventions around interacting with animals. I wouldn't say pets really, but like connecting with other parts of the web of life or something along those lines.
Yeah, so obviously animals are a great mitigator for stress, and they're known to lower your cortisol levels. Having that bond between the human and animal. Most of the canine guys that I know are really low key dudes, and I think a lot of that comes with the bond that they have with the animal. And I believe that that relationship is not only unique but incredibly special. So at our agency, like I said, we didn't have canine officers, but we had throughout the state of New Jersey something called the DVVRT, the Domestic Violence Victim Response Team. And what that it was is if you're a victim of domestic violence, I can bring you back to the station and you can speak to someone who's trained on how to listen to you and provide you resources. One of our DVVRT members at the agency where I worked, all volunteers, by the way, from the community, and she had a therapy dog. It was initially such a huge turnoff for the police officers in our agency. We're like, oh, we don't want to bring this dog in here and make some. But when I saw how that dog helped the victim, it was fascinating to me. And it caused me to keep my eyes and ears open to that world. So I think there's a huge space for therapy dogs. Uh, I think having a canine in the agency is therapy in and of itself, even though it's a working dog and that dog has a responsibility at that agency. But when that dog's in the building, it changes the mood. It's incredible how people become children around a dog. I don't care if they're the toughest SWAT dude on the planet, or if they're, a fluffy detective that works with kids. Like eh, people crumble, their emotions crumble around the animal, and it's really amazing to watch. I've seen the same thing with mounted officers. You can horse and equine therapy is a thing, and it works really well. So I think that there's unrealized benefits to people that are in those positions in the law enforcement field, and canine officers and mounted officers are definitely different, and I think it's because of that bond they have with the animal.
Fascinating. Before the program, I was sharing a little bit about a part of my career trajectory, and that's working in the reentry space. And one of the one of the retired uh, Department of Correction administrators was when I asked him about what gave him what was the brightest spot in that work, and he said the programs with canines, and one of them was working with animals from shelters that had not had basic obedience training and probably didn't have very good chances of adoption. And they work with incarcerated individuals to train them in that way. And then there's another organization that I think it's like companion therapy dog kind of
Mhm.
situation where it's not a service animal full on, but it's like a support animal,
Mhm.
maybe a higher level of a dog that hasn't been in a shelter yet before or something along those. Anyways,
So I think there's multiple
yeah,
components there. I think that number one, a dog gives unconditional love because they need you to survive. So they want to serve you because they know that their survival, their food, their love is going to come from you. So they will unconditionally give that to you first and give that back to you upon return. So that's number one. But I also think that there's such a level of compassion building within the human that provides that service back to the dog. It makes you feel useful and purposeful in a way that you may have not felt before, especially when you're talking about the environment you're discussing here in incarceration space. Uh, the people that are incarcerated may not have been loved by anything before, and they may not have had to care for anything before. So when you introduce that relationship to somebody, I think that just builds their character in a way that they may have not had exposure to in the past. And it's really important.
probably some similar dynamics happening all across the board with animals and humans, I'm guessing.
I agree.
But thanks for thanks for reflecting a bit on that. And is there anything else that I haven't asked that you feel you would like to talk about? Maybe that
Mm.
came up or something that you've been thinking about for a while, or what is the field of positive psychology looking like? It's a world that I am an appreciator of. I feel like myself, I kind of stand at the intersection of well-being science and community building, and um, try to kind of have evidence-based projects for community building. And oh, here's one. I don't know if I shared this, but I have this idea that there should be an international day of strengths. There's already International Day of Happiness, International Day of Hope, both referencing
Mm.
hope, well-being science. I think strengths, and in particular, I was sharing a little bit about the history of its connection with Lincoln, Nebraska, and being here. Uh, at the very least, I'm guessing like the Chamber of Commerce and the Visitors Bureau would like it or something. But no, I think it's really like a cool thing that we you can kind of point to the community and say, here's where that came from. Or I think Hope Science was from Lawrence, Kansas. Asset-based community development from Chicago. I'm guessing you can point to a few communities where some of these ideas have emerged from. Well, Pennsylvania itself, and the
Hmm.
first uh probably any academic program in positive psychology, I'm guessing. But
Yeah, Penn was the first.
sorry, I got rolling, but to you.
Yeah, no worries. It's interesting, the National Day of Strengths, and I think strengths is really something important to talk about. And I know that how you value that conversation. And as you and I spoke prior to the podcast show itself, is the way I look at strengths is not necessarily the absence of problems, but the building from a foundation. So I have compared this to, as we talked about, growing grass. And strengths, if we to grow strong grass, we need to fertilize it. Just by merely pulling the weeds from the grass, all that does is make it look good temporarily, but we leave space for more weeds to grow back because those roots are in there. They're down there and they're going to come back through that space if our grass isn't strong enough to hold it out. Now, looking at the science of strengths, if we strengthen our grass by fertilizing it, just like we would fertilize our brains with good things and exercise and healthy diets and positive interactions with people and accomplishments. If we fertilize our grass, what it'll do is close up those holes and naturally push out the weeds. So the bad stuff will go away if we have stronger grass and be much harder for it to grow back. So I think that's the same for who we are as humans. If we build from a strengths-based science in our own well-being, we are less likely to have the negative stuff negatively impact us. So I think it's an interesting conversation to have. And in the law enforcement space, we are exposed to negativity, 40 plus hours a week. And that goes back to the conversation of neuroplasticity. We look at neuroplasticity in the space of positive psychology as a good thing, that the more we do something, the more our brains adapt to it, the more we'll do it. And so when you're growing these neural pathways into positive growth, that's amazing, and it works, right? The studies show that's a thing. We've never really talked about it on the negative side. And I think I think we need to build more on that conversation. How did we get so screwed up to begin with? And on the law enforcement space, is we are exposed to the worst of humanity. We have a front row seat to the worst circus on the planet for the course of our 25 or so year career on average. And our new normal is really bad. And our bodies and brains keep the score of that new normal in a very negative way. And I think that's what leads us down to this path of self-destruction and ultimately suicide. In law enforcement, we are 4 times more likely to die by our own hand than a criminal on the street. So while the numbers are really good this year, actually, line of duty deaths in law enforcement are down in 2025 significantly by almost 25%. And the homicides of those line of duty deaths, I think, was like 56 or 57 out of the 94 line of duty deaths. By the way, this is the first year in almost 50 years we're below 100 line of duty deaths. It's incredible. Now, on the suicide portion of that conversation, we're at 190 or something for 2025. That's a lot. It's way too many. And so you're like 4 times more likely to die by your own hand than you are out on the street. That's not okay. Uh, we need to do better for ourselves so we can do better for our communities, for our agencies, but most importantly, for our families. So when we can use this strengths building or positive psychology science towards greater well-being in our own worlds and our own lives, we're going to do much better for everybody else. And I think one of the, you mentioned challenges in positive psychology. We've done a lot of work in the field of positive psychology on the research side, but positive psychology, like the A in MAP, is an applied science. And I think right now one of the struggles is where do we draw that, not where do we draw the divide or the line, but how do we combine the research with practical application? And I think there's some rub there that needs to be worked out. So when we're talking about how it can affect specific industries, the generalizations of the research needs to be a little bit more accessible so we can use it. And I think if I can improve one thing in the field of positive psychology, being a practitioner versus a researcher, I would say greater accessibility as a practitioner to the research. And a lot of that's behind firewalls and pay for walls and all that kind of stuff. And I get it, it's got to be funded. But it's very hard to apply the science if we don't have access to it. So that was a lot of
Uh,
answers to a lot of questions, and I hope it merged together in the right way.
makes yeah, that makes total sense. Thank you for all your time and exploring all this, and I look forward to keeping in touch and seeing what happens, and maybe having another guest appearance with whatever developments happen. And if you want to come back on the show to talk through anything, or bask in the glory of what it accomplishes or whatever, like,
Yeah,
that'd be
for sure.
awesome.
I think when we connect in a community, it's when things grow. To do these things on your own is very difficult. But when we can combine emotional, mental, physical, financial resources, I think we can grow it in a way that creates greater meaning and greater purpose, even if that purpose isn't yours individually, but maybe, person A and person B have some sort of overlap that they couldn't do individually, but that overlap creates possibilities for both. So I think when we're trying to build out, and this is a new science still, it's only 25 years old, 26 years old. I think that when we do things together, 1 + 1 = 3.
It seems to work better in the psychological realm than in the material realm.
I agree.
If
I agree. Certainly.
you can figure it out in the material realm, I have a bank account that would like to talk with you. But
Yeah, it would be nice. Uh,
anyways, yeah.
yeah, but
Well,
combining efforts, I think, is important, and I've seen it at conferences. I was at the International Positive Psychology Association conference this past year in Australia, and watching the collaboration between researchers and practitioners was really special. And sharing ideas and sharing thoughts and understanding how we can do things better together than apart and isolated was inspiring to me.
very cool. Well, thank you for pursuing the opportunities that you've pursued. And thank you for being a guest on the show. If people would like to find out more about your work, where should we send them?
I think the two best places are LinkedIn. If you want to look up me on LinkedIn, I'd be happy to connect with you there. And I do have a website. It's 64consultants.com. So it's SIX, the number 4consultants.com. And I also have been lucky enough to be able to write for Psychology Today. So if you are a reader of Psychology Today, feel free to put my name in the search bar and you can see the articles that I post in there.
And anything else you would care to share today?
Yeah, lastly, if you're interested in the work that I'm doing and want to learn a little bit more about me and how I've applied it to my life, I do have a book called A Resilient Life, Cop's Pursuit of Purpose. And I would greatly appreciate if you bought it. It's on Amazon, it's on Barnes and Noble, wherever you get your books. And I would appreciate that support, but it would also give you greater insight into where I've come from and where I'm going.
Thank you so much.
Grateful to be part of your platform, and thank you for providing me the opportunity to share with your audience.
I think we have a podcast. Anyways, all right.
All
Well,
right, very
thank
good.
you.
Thank you
And
so much, and we will certainly talk soon.